Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dots. Today on the show, we're bringing in one of my favorite people, Kurt Kemple. Kurt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it is an honor and a pleasure. Anytime I get a chance to talk to you is a good day. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So, you and I have a little bit of background. We used to work together oh, jeez. Whoops. Did that thing where I forgot to mute in the other channel.
Story of my life.
Jeez. So here we are. We got you and I used to work together. You've worked at Major League Soccer. You're currently working at Apollo. I'm just super excited because you have one of the more interesting stories that I've heard in terms of breaking into tech and all of that. But maybe we can start with just a little bit of background. So if you want to tell everybody kind of what you're doing now, where you are in your career right now.
Yeah, so right now, and I like to say, it's what the folks in the biz call a non-traditional background, right, into tech, absolutely. But right now, currently, I am a developer relations manager at Apollo GraphQL. So for folks who aren't familiar, Apollo GraphQL has a lot of like open source tooling and a platform that helps folks be successful with GraphQL. Surprise, surprise. So that's kind of where I'm at now. It's a very dev advocacy, developer relations type focus role, which I've slowly transitioned to over the last couple of years. Before that, just doing a lot of development work and things of that nature. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, for sure. And so and you've grown from a position to you broke into tech a while back. How long have you been in the industry now?
Ooh, so I got my first like professional job 2013, so about coming up on like 8 years.
Nice.
January will be about 8 years.
Yeah. So over the course of that 8 years, you've been able to go from your first job, your entry level job, to where you're now a manager at a company that people know the name of. You're in a position to kind of hire. You're growing a team. That's pretty exciting stuff. And I think maybe a little unexpected given your background, right? So maybe I think what would be really fun to talk about to start is, where did you come from? Like, what happened before you broke into tech?
A whole laundry list of things happened before I broke into tech. It's always tough to like figure out where to start. But I'll say this: I learned how to code. I started learning how to code when I was incarcerated. I was actually serving time, doing hard time. It actually was really hard. But So before that, I worked a lot of odd and end jobs. I dropped out of high school when I was probably about 16 years old, I think. My memory is honestly very fuzzy of anything before like my time in incarceration. And the reason for that is drug addiction. So I suffered from drug addiction. I was real deep in the throes of it from about the time of 14 years old until about 22 years old when I was incarcerated. And so I worked odd and end jobs like line cook. I worked for a general contractor for a long time, did a lot of construction, stuff like that. And then, that's pretty much the gist of it. Before that, then I did about 7 years locked up, and that's where I was actually introduced to programming.
Yeah, so I'd actually love to hear about that. Like, how did you get introduced to programming while you were locked up?
So one of the things that happened is like, I spent about a year in jail, and I had a lot of time for the fog in my brain to kind of clear. And so when I was before the judge and I got sentenced in there like 5 to 7 years, time in prison, that was like getting hit with a hammer right in the chest. And, I don't really remember what the trip like was getting back to the jail and all that. I just remember that night just making a promise to myself. I wasn't going to waste a minute of time. I was going to take any programs that they made available to me. I was going to do whatever I could to make sure that when I got out, I would only be as far back, a step back as possible. Like, yes, I'm out of here, but maybe I can learn some useful skills and some things to apply when I get out. So I just took a blanket offering of courses. I got certified in HVAC, carpentry, electrical work, plumbing, landscape
Interesting.
design, dog training. What else? Like all kinds of things. Literally anything that was
Yeah,
offered. Cooking program. Yeah, and then so what happened was I had like no skill with computer. So I actually started out taking like a course on how to use like Microsoft Office, and I took a
sure.
typing course and these other type of things. And then they offered something on networking. So I started to like get into IT and how computers actually work and how to build them and stuff. So it was very cool. And then just there was this one course, Intro to like either web design or web development. I can't remember. It was like in all caps on the certificate, like just some like weird course. And it was HTML, CSS, and just a splash of JavaScript. And
Nice.
I was hooked. As soon as I got my first Hello World H1 and I hit refresh in the browser and I saw that update, like neurons just started firing. I'm like, I know how the internet works. I felt like I was in the Matrix. Like I know kung fu. It's like it was pretty cool.
No, that's great. So that actually is really fascinating because I knew you had learned to code when you were inside, but I didn't realize that you had also picked up all those other skills. So
Yeah.
when you got out, did you immediately go into web dev, or kind of what was the path between then and your first job?
Yeah, it was a very, very hard path. It was probably the hardest 3 years of my life, honestly. Even counting prison time, counting my time in the throes of drug addiction. And the reason why is because I had accumulated a lot of valuable skills, but when you are a felon, nobody really wants to hire you. You
Yeah.
have a lot of other people who have skills as well. So whenever I have to check that little, are you a felon box or have you been convicted of a felony within the last 7 years? Never get the call back. Never. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm certified HVAC. I'm trying to get jobs in welding shops. I'm trying to get jobs IT, anything like blanketing across. I can't even work at Target or McDonald's. Like
Hmm.
and I think people just kind of don't realize like recidivism is so high because folks don't have stability when they get out. They get out, they want to do better. Nobody wants to go back to prison. It's not like I was in there with a bunch of folks who are like, shit, sorry,
No.
shoot, as soon as I get out of here, yeah, I'm going to go commit a crime and come right back because this place is fantastic.
Yeah.
That's just like not it. And it got close. I almost ended up going back to dealing drugs because I had no money, I had no things. But instead, I said, you know what, like screw these companies. They're not going to give me a chance. So I stopped checking the box. And what I would do is I would work at a job for about 3 or 4 weeks until they would do a background check. And they'd be like, you're one of our best workers, but like we have to let you go because you didn't check the box. And I'm like, well, when I check it, you don't call me back. But don't worry, I've already applied to like 7 other places, so I'll go work there for a few weeks. And that whole time, I was just self guided learning, right? I was,
Sure.
building things in my spare time when I could, watching things on YouTube, just doing a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah, it was pretty rough. But eventually, I landed a job at a company called Gold Mobile,
Okay.
and yeah, and that was like my first breakthrough.
Yeah.
Was them giving me a chance. It was cool, but it was a really weird situation too. Because what happened was they hired me, and I worked there for a couple weeks. I was doing a fantastic job. I'm like, oh, we totally forgot to have you fill out the background check. And I'm like,
Oh.
ooh, here it comes, right? Like here it is again. Every time it's always like the background check. And yeah, so I was like, okay, so I'm left with this choice. Like, what do I do here, right? So I was working on this project. I just like finished it. Like I was just like, I just worked on it like all night. I finished it and I brought it to my manager in the morning. And I was like, hey, I completed the project. This is the type of work that you can expect from me should you choose to let me stay on. My background check, you're going to see I have a record. I was like, but because of that, like I have a lot to prove, and I'm really willing to work extra. And it sucks that you get kind of put into that situation.
Hmm.
And yeah, so it's just like I had no choice but to overwork myself and do that. And then it was just weird. Like they let me stay on, but for 6 months, I just felt like everybody was just like looking at me differently.
Mm,
It felt like I had gotten over on them. I don't know. And I think a lot of that was internal. I was internalizing a lot of things, a lot
sure.
of
Yeah.
stigma about people with records. But it was hard, but it was my break. It was the thing that got me in there. It got me 6 months of experience and had a little something on my resume for, to move forward with. But yeah, it took about 3 years from release to first job.
Oof. So, so one of the things that I love to talk about on this show, and that I think is just so important to focus on, is this idea that, getting into tech is hard, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about like how everybody watching can break into tech a little bit later in the show. But for now, I kind of want to focus on this idea that like you had to break into tech not with your technical skills, but with a whole range of other skills. That you had to. There was so much perseverance, and there was a little bit of kind of ingenuity or craftiness in getting just through the interview process because you had to check that box. Where do you feel like you picked up those skills? Like what skills did you use that aren't tech skills that helped you land this first job?
Yeah, you pick up skills from everywhere, and I'm so glad that you bring that up because a lot of folks feel like if like we focus so much on technical ability that we forget that that's actually a very small part of the day-to-day job. Like, yes, you might write a decent amount of code, but there's a whole lot of other responsibilities and things that you need to be pretty good at in order to succeed, right? And so a lot of the things that really helped me was like working construction and as a line cook, understanding how to prioritize and organize the workload and make sure that you're doing things in the correct order. Those are invaluable skills. Taking a large job and breaking that down into smaller pieces. That happens every day in the construction world.
Every day.
It goes from every day. If you're framing a house, you don't say, I'm going to frame a house. It's like, first we got to lay first we got to lay down the foundation, right? We got to set everything up to get the flooring on. Then we're going to stand up some walls, right? And then we're going to start working on the second floor, and it's like you work up, and then it's like eventually before you know it, you got a roof. But you don't start like we build the house, right? You break it down into its tiny itty bitty pieces. And also, I learned a lot of valuable skills about working with other teams, other people. So as a framer, we have to work with the plumbers. We have to work with the electricians, understand their needs, making sure that our part of the job is done in time so that they can come behind and do their part of the job. So invaluable skills. You learn the same things in the kitchen. If you want to see orchestration like at its finest, watch line cooks, because when you have like an order of like a 10 people order come in and everything needs to finish at about the same time, and they have different needs as far as like where it's being cooked, for how long it needs to be cooked. 3 items on the menu might be the same thing, but needed to be done at like different temperatures. We look at like steaks or burgers, right? And it's like you have to orchestrate all of this, not just within your station, but with the rest of the team. And if you're not communicating, you're never going to get that done. It's never going to be right. If you're going in there and you're like, well, I'm just going to worry about just my little piece and forget the rest, like everything's going to fall apart. You're not going to succeed in that role. So I think things like that are extremely transferable.
Yeah.
And then that kind of, it brings me to my next point, which is empathy and understanding. And this was something that I really started to internalize and realize in my time incarcerated. Just understanding like that your perspective of the world is not the center of everything. It's not the default, that lots of other people have lived experiences that are very different from yours, and thinking about others whenever you're doing something. So that was a huge thing to learn. And then lastly, understanding folks like investments in things, and then just kind of like being able to kind of understand how people are feeling like in a given situation. Like in prison, you
Ooh,
have to know what everyone around you is thinking 24/7. You never get
right.
to turn that off, right? Like I need to know if the person next to me has malicious intent. I need to know if the person on the other side of me might like be suicidal. Like there's a lot of like interesting dynamics there that in
Right.
order to just walk through, you have to literally know how everyone around you is feeling. You have to start learning body language, how to pick up on micro cues and microaggressions, understand when is appropriate time to approach folks and when not to. And I think like of all the skills that I've learned, that has been the most valuable and helped me the most in my career. And like what I mean by that, like an actual situation that I can compare in the tech world is, let's say it's coming up for review time, and I think somebody on my team should be getting a raise, right? Like I'm ready to make this
Mm,
case, but I kind of want to like start talking to my manager about this. Now, if I walk up to my manager and I can see that their heads down working on something, or maybe even slightly frustrated or something like that, like it's probably not the best time to be asking these type of questions. I need to be able to get their full attention, and two, I want to catch them when they're probably in a much happier state, right? Like
mm,
I don't want to you want to be able to like have as good an opportunity as possible. And so sometimes that's reading body language,
yeah.
understanding what people's responsibilities are, what their investments are, like what are they trying to get out of this, and how can you help show them that by doing this they're going to achieve their goals as well. So just understanding people is like paramount. If the more
You know,
that you can work on that, the better you'll be.
yeah, and when you said that, it kind of connected a couple dots in my head where I was thinking about like, that's actually one of the most valuable skills I've seen when you get to any team of a bigger group than you can have a single meeting with, right? So, once you
Yes.
cross about 12, suddenly you're not having conversations where everyone is on the same page. Now you're having to have conversations where everybody's got their own sliver of the larger picture. And what I
Yeah.
think is really interesting about that is that where empathy plays into that, and where being able to read a situation or understand someone's motivations. Like if I want, if I'm a engineer and I want to convince the product team that we should build something a certain way, I shouldn't go make a case for why it's a great technical solution. That's not their interest. That's not their motivation. Instead, I should be, as you said, think about what they want. Think about what their
Yep.
concerns are. What's stressing them out. And if I can
Yeah.
frame my technical solution in a way that solves their problems, I'm so much more likely to get that decision adopted. Um,
100%. 100%. Know the stakeholders and know what their investments are. If you're armed with that information, it makes it so much easier to bring up points and to raise the right questions or the right statements or solutions, because you know what everybody is involved in this for and why they care about it. Empathy, right? It always comes back to like communication, empathy. Those are to me the most valuable skills that you can possess across any job, honestly, but
Absolutely.
especially in tech as well.
Yeah, if you're going to work with people, being able to read people is going to be like number one, no matter what the underlying job is.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
and
that's
it's yeah, but we have to be careful because like there are a lot of folks who that doesn't come as naturally too.
mhm.
Luckily that is something that I've been able to develop. I also did read a lot of books on these exact topics and stuff
Same.
as well. Yeah, same. Yeah, so it is a learnable skill. It's not just either you have it or you don't. But yeah, there's a lot of folks who, might not be as like emotionally attuned, and
Mhm.
so we have to preface that. Yeah, it could definitely be a lot harder for folks to achieve this, but it's definitely a valuable skill if you can get yourself there.
So you just said something that I'd love to dig into a little bit, and I know that we've got questions coming from the chat. Quincy's doing a great job of queuing those up, and we will get to those. But
Awesome.
I
Thank
want
you.
to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about this. You said it's a learnable skill, and
Yeah.
one of the things that I find most fascinating is the way that individual people go about learning. So when you're up against learning something that doesn't come naturally to you, so for me, learning how to have those conversations with people, how to be empathetic, that was not natural to me. It was something I had to put a lot of work into.
Yeah.
When you come up against something like that, what is your preferred way to learn a new skill?
Oh, that's really good. And it's actually kind of situational. But
Sure.
I would say most things, I am more of what's called like a kinetic learner. I learn best by doing.
Mm,
And so I'll take input from multiple different avenues, whether that be like reading, listening to things, watching other things. But until I start to do it myself, it's very hard to put into place. So depending on like what the skill is, it can be hard to get yourself into these situations. So for me, when it was, I was kind of like forced into learning this because I was incarcerated. So I was actually thrown into these situations every single day, which made it basically impossible to not be practicing it. But you still have to be very careful. So what I would just start doing is applying this to my everyday life. And what I mean by that is like, having empathy is something that isn't just necessary in like business communication. It's very also very important inside your personal relationships.
right.
So I would start applying these practices like, okay, am I listening more than I am speaking? Right? Like I start taking the parts out of these books, like the things they want me to try. And I would essentially just like break that down and just focus on little bits of it and try to apply that till it becomes muscle memory and move on to the next step. So in the first case, do I listen more than I talk when I'm interacting with folks? That's something
Right.
that I like to focus on. Once that started to become natural, the second thing would be, okay, am I understanding their investment in something? Like if they're upset about something, like, do I really know why? Like, yes, my friend is upset, but why are they upset? Right. And it's like
Hmm.
trying to understand that. Then I would start moving on to things like body language. Here's a really fun fact. When you enter into a room and you see somebody that you know, and this doesn't mean like whether they like you or dislike you, but you can generally tell whether or not they're like excited by your presence because in some form or fashion, they will fight gravity. That could be raising their eyebrows, the shoulders coming up, exactly a smile where they actually doesn't go back, but it goes up. The
Right,
head
right,
lifts a
right.
little. They wave. Literally anything where they fight gravity because gravity is always working against us. So if I'm willing to work against gravity, that means I'm actually interested enough, invested enough to show you that. It's subconscious, but like 99% of the time, it's on point. And
Yeah,
again, it doesn't mean whether someone is happy to see you or not, but if you're my manager and I walk into the room and I see those eyebrows go up, it's probably a great time to ask you a question about something that I've been wanting to run by you,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas if I get the straight face and I can tell you're somewhere else and you're not focused, it's probably not the best time.
Yeah,
And
that's
so that's just like, yeah, that's like one, little bit of it. But yeah, it's like kind of like understanding that stuff, breaking things into smaller pieces, attacking them one at a time until you build it up as what you would consider to be a base skill that you now possess and moving on to the next thing.
absolutely. So I guess maybe like a good thing to move into here is a lot of the folks watching right now have been asking a lot of questions about how to get their first job, and so I've got a few questions here. The first one is from Mila, and Mila's asking about what certificates should she get to get into the world of software programming and coding. Um, do you think that certificates? I mean, you mentioned that you got certified in a handful of things when you were inside. What role have you seen certificates play in? I mean, you're hiring now, right? So like, what are you
Yeah.
looking for in that?
Yeah, I'm hiring now. I've been a hiring manager before. So there's one thing that I want to state here real quick too, which is like I have a privileged path into tech, and so my path and what I've done, will work. But for a lot of folks, it's a true statement. It will be a lot harder for other people than myself to break into tech, even with a background. We have a big problem with that in the tech industry, and so I just want to preface that. But yes, there are still a lot of things that you can do that really do stand to help you stand a better chance of like breaking into tech.
Hmm.
And I think certificates can play a role. I think it might be less about certificates and more about until you have work experience, you need something to put on a resume. People need
Yes.
something to take a first glance at, right? And now this could be certificates, it could be a portfolio that you've built, you could take on some freelance projects if you can do that. But ideally, you want something that you can put right at the top of your resume that's really going to help people get an idea of your current level of skill, right? And again, this is very hard.
Yeah. I what I would say on top of that is that it's your current level of skill, and it's also the job that you want. Like what I've noticed is that people tend to get hired for the skills that they put out there. So a lot of times when someone has a broad variety of skills, there's an art of like elevating the ones that you want to get hired for and potentially not emphasizing. So if you're currently working in IT or like systems networking and you don't want to do that anymore, you want to do software, you should highlight the certificates around like software engineering and maybe bury the IT stuff because you don't want to get hired as in another IT role.
Absolutely. So something, I'm so glad that you brought that up. So I'll finish this thought real quick, and then I want to jump directly into that. There's studies that show when folks look at your resume, they go top left, just below that to the left, and then over to the right. And then everything else below that kind of falls off, right? And I've tested this against myself. I do the exact same thing. Those are the spots that my eyes get drawn to first, and that's where people are going to look. So I always recommend a 2-column layout with your most important information, your most important experience, whether that is a certificate, a particular project that you're proud of, the one thing that you really want to showcase, and then to the right, like the next important thing that you think is ancillary to that will help you get that done. I have found this to be an invaluable tool to help. And then actually, to speak to your point, not only will I bury things that are irrelevant to the role that I'm currently working at or working towards, but I will also put together multiple versions of my resume. This is something that I do very often. Maybe I'm willing to take a role in dev advocacy and a engineering role, or particularly a management role. You cannot create one resume that you'll be able to submit for all of those jobs that are going to highlight the right things. Because another piece of advice is keep your resume to 1 page. People rarely go to page 2, and anything that's on there might as well as not be on there. And because you only have that 1 page, like you said, it's so important to highlight those things for the job that you want. So I'll have different cover letters and resumes for each type of role that I'm going to know that I'll apply for. It's a little bit of extra work, but I find that it really lets me focus in on the things that are going to show off what makes me good for that job. Where this starts to differ is because if you're just breaking in to tech, you're not going to have a huge background of work to pull from, but you have an entire life of experience to pull from. And just how we were talking about the transferable skills, working at McDonald's, you learn a lot of very valuable skills. And when you're putting that on your resume, listing out the things like coordinating, between multiple teammates to deliver, meals, on time, right, and properly, organizing and prioritizing, balancing workloads between, what I'm doing here or doing there. Maybe you took on some management responsibilities in these roles. Like, that's all very valuable. So don't discount your life experience. It's
absolutely
important. I look at that.
Yeah, my first job I got because I had, graphic design work and printing press pre-production work, and all of that helped me build enough like adjacent experience to be able to convince someone to give me a shot on the real job, right? I think that's a really, really good point. Like, and the other thing too is, a certificate, you can choose which certificates to get. You don't have to do that with an employer's permission. You don't have to get hired. You can take that certificate. Similarly with projects. So there's a question from Hamza about how good is the approach of learning a skill by doing projects right away. And so I'm gonna pass this to you. But what I'll say up front is, if you are trying to get a job doing animation, or if you are trying to get a job as a full stack engineer, build projects that do that work. Because I know for me, like if I see that all the work you do is in the service of the job you're applying for, I know that you're interested, even if it's your first career, right? And so so what would you recommend for someone, like certificates, projects, something else? Should they freelance? Where should people go?
That's a fantastic question. I think it is going to boil down a little bit to preference. So I do love projects because that allows you to generally create something that like you can mix in your passion. So learning is hard. And in order to stay motivated, it's really nice to be able to mix in like a little bit of things that you like and enjoy. And so when you learn by doing, when you build projects, like for me, there's like a couple things, that I really like. I like longboarding. I dabble in video games and stuff like that. I have like some other interests like around collectibles and fun things. And like, I can take any of those and turn those into a project, right? Or build
Absolutely.
something around my interests. And by doing that, it's going to help me when I get frustrated. Hopefully that passion can be enough to kind of carry you through and see you through to the end. It also shows through a bit of your personality, which I think goes a long way. And people, I guess, undervalue. It's okay
Yeah.
to shine a little bit and have some individuality. I like when I see resumes. They don't have to be like, this like big graphic design project, but when it's a little bit different than, just a standard like Word doc with bullets listed out, I love it because I get to like, just get a peek at, someone like putting in a little bit of themselves into things. And I think whenever
Right.
you put a little bit of yourself into something, you're going to invest a little bit more in it. And it's nice. But I would also say it's like deciding on how you learn. Some
Hmm.
people like structure, right? Like if you like school and you learn well in a structured environment, certificates are probably a fantastic way to continue growing and to
Hmm.
build up something to put on the resume. If you kind of like to do your own thing and just kind of build stuff and discover things as you go with projects because you're going to be able to do that. Freelancing can be quite a bit of burden because you also have to then understand the freelancing market. Nothing infuriates me more than folks who are branching out. They get into freelancing and end up just with these like red flag clients, like
Oh
terrible
yeah.
clients. And they, I have friends going through this right now. The scope creep, the project grows, it turns from a learning experience into like a doom project, and it's just,
Right. Right.
I hate to see that. So I'm always a bit weary of freelancing, but taking on small projects could be a good way. And if you need money, it's also not a bad option as well. You get to add things to your portfolio while you build a little bit of revenue. So,
Well, and something
but
that will happen, whether you want it to or not, when you take on freelance work, is you're going to learn things about management, about planning,
oh yeah.
about, being communicative, how to like tell people about setbacks in a way that doesn't blow up the relationship. All those things, those are very valuable
Yeah.
skills. Um,
Very valuable.
not a
Yeah.
super fun way to learn them if you're doing it for the
No.
first time with a freelance client, but you will build a whole different set of skills along with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. But if I'm being honest, to me, I think that still one of the best ways this day and age to break into tech is to focus on building a community, building
Yes.
a network. A lot of folks call it. I like to say community. Network rings hollow to me. Community rings as something that is two-way, right? Like you're helping others as they're helping you. And learning in public. Learning in public is another very valuable way to do a lot of those skills that you just mentioned. You're learning how to communicate clearly. You're showcasing that you are able to break problems down, distill them, and share them, what you've learned with others, invaluable skills to have in programming or in general. And so, honestly, while you're looking for jobs, you should always be thinking about, does my community look like? How can I grow that in a healthy way?
Right.
Because most of the times the jobs that you really are going to love and the opportunities that you shine rarely come from it's not always the case. There's always exceptions, but rarely does it come from you dropping your application through a contact us form. A lot
Yeah.
of times it comes from a network, right? Like people, they understand who you are in the community. They've seen the stuff you're doing. It lines up with what they're trying to do. And then boom, next thing you know, you're interviewing at this company. So it's always something I recommend too.
So there's a couple questions that are really closely related to this, especially given right now where everyone's on lockdown due to coronavirus.
Yeah.
Building a community, getting a first job. A lot of the advice that we've seen in previous years is that people getting into their first role should not do it remotely. And I think that there are some arguments there, there's good reasoning for that. Like when you are new to something,
Absolutely.
it's really nice to be able to sit next to somebody, to have that support network, to be surrounded by people doing the same work. But that's not an option right now. So for, let's see, both Daniel and Hamza are asking, how should that be approached for people who are, we have to build a community remotely. We have to get our first jobs remotely. What strategies would you recommend for folks to succeed there?
Yeah, wow. What an amazing question. Yeah. So I think the first thing that you want to check, and it stinks because, when it's your first time, you're not really in like a position of power. If you're already in a job and you're comfortable, you could be a lot more nitpicky with the companies that you're going to interview with or jobs that you'll take. As the first time, it can be hard. But I want to say you want to look out for like what folks will call like red flags around like remote work and condition, or is this a company with a track record of already working with juniors, or will you be the first junior developer to come on board? That's one question alone that if you get the answer to that can be a strong indicator. Now, if you are the first junior, but they're a company who's already been working remotely for a lot of time and they've built up those practices, you're probably safe. But if it's a company who's just gone remote because of COVID and they don't have a track record of onboarding juniors already, it's probably going to be pretty difficult. Doesn't mean it won't work. It just means that's something that you might want to consider. Mm-hmm. And I think this circles back to if you get in a habit of learning in public, one thing that's going to come along with that is asking a lot of questions.
Yes.
As you learn in public, you're not just going to share what you learn, but you're going to start to ask your community questions to learn better. And if you find yourself in a position, remote first company, because it's your first junior development job, over communicate. And you really can't over communicate, but a lot of folks want to hold back for lack of feeling, like they should know something, or they should not, save questions and ask them all at one time. I say don't. Find the people in the company who always seem awesome about answering your questions. There's going to be people in any company, no matter how good or bad it is, that like to help folks. Yep. Find them and ask them. Just constantly ask them questions. You're not bothering them. They love it. That's what they're there for. They want to help you. So I would say definitely communicate early and communicate often. And this goes like even further. Don't write up this whole pull request, right, and make a bunch of changes, push it, and then ask for a change.
Right.
As soon as you create the branch, push it up and open a pull request. Each commit, push that up and ask for feedback early and often. That is like my number one piece of advice for folks.
And remember, you can set a pull request on GitHub in draft mode, which means this isn't ready yet. Yeah. I'm working on it, and that lets people see what you're doing. Which I love that advice. Absolutely. Personally. Like, one of the things that I really enjoy about people who I'm working with in a lead capacity, where I'm kind of helping level them up, is when there's that constant seeking of feedback. If somebody sends me 1,500 lines of code and they're like, "Can you give me some feedback on this?" I'm like, I can, but it's not going to be nearly as good as if you had sent me 100 lines of code. And so it's definitely one of those things that you can optimize your environment, right? If you think about how it would feel to be on the other end of this, like, would you rather somebody has a problem, doesn't tell you about it, gets the company in trouble, and then like comes to you later and says, "Hey, I know that our team's on the hook for this thing, but I didn't do it because I wasn't sure how. Here's my problem. I know it's due today." Or would you rather somebody said, "Hey, I need to work on this and I'm not quite sure. Can you help me unstick this so that I can get started?" Right? There's that, like, I would much rather get asked early so that the team gets all their work done on time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. It's just the cognitive overhead. It's a two-way street. Like, if you build things up, it becomes a large investment. And it's very hard for people to have the resources or energy to respond to that large investment. Whereas if it's coming through bite size in like a constant flow, it's a lot easier, right? Like the feedback loop is much smaller, much tighter. I can answer one or two questions 15 times throughout a day. Much easier than I can take an hour to 2 hours to like review like a very large PR, if that makes sense.
That absolutely makes sense. Yeah. I mean, and that's how I think a lot of us function as senior devs, managers, we get ourselves in a position where we try to be quickly doing little bits of work to move the whole team forward.
Right.
If we have to drop everything to focus on one effort, the rest of the team bottlenecks up.
Yes.
And so that's, it's also like, and these are the skills, like these are the things, when I see somebody learning this skill, when I see somebody getting really good at sending pull requests, at, sending like small scopes of work instead of sending me everything all at once, that's when I start to think like, this person's they're getting it. They're going to go somewhere. Like let's get them on the fast track. Right. So it's also a great way to advance in your career.
Absolutely. Because it just showcases that you're starting to understand, feedback loops, what it means to think about other people's time in relation to the things that you have to do. And it also just shows, your willingness to communicate. And it's just such a valuable skill,
Absolutely.
I can't state it enough, but yeah.
And so that willingness to communicate, I also think builds confidence. When you ask a question and you get an answer, that's a small confirmation that says this is okay. And when you do that a lot, it builds that confidence. It gets that ball rolling. And actually, I'm going to ask a question to you from Elliot because I think it's related. Elliot says, I'm hitting a lot of walls where I get to the final round of an interview. Then I keep getting told that I'm too junior or need more experience. What would you advise for someone to do in this position?
Yeah, that's really tough. So honestly, Elliot, I feel that is more on the company than it is on you. I feel a lot of times companies position roles as junior, and then you look at the requirements for the role and what they want out of it, and it's not quite there. But yeah, it is. It's difficult. But if you want to improve that, there are a couple things that you can do. And so to me, this comes back to like projects, right? This is why I like projects. Actually, that's how I got the job at Major League Soccer. I had started to understand that like I was pushing, outside of front end roles. A lot of the stuff I had done previously had been front end. I got very curious about like the API gateway layer and like back end work and kind of what that looked like. So I set up like a microservices architecture. I took some time. I tried to invest in Docker and understand like how you would architect having multiple different APIs all talking to one. And then turns out that was like exactly what Major League Soccer was looking for, right? They wanted a full stack developer who knew really how to work from the API gateway down, but understood at least what was happening a little step further. So I think it's also a matter of being able to talk about things. And so I always like to think about things as like drip learning. Like you hear about different learning styles, like shallow learning, which is like, know a little bit about everything, or T learning, know a little bit about everything, dive deep in one thing. I'm a big fan of drip learning, like only learn what you need to know to do like the very next step. And sometimes you'll learn a little bit and sometimes you'll get down further, but you have this shallow pool and some things just to kind of drip all over the place. Yeah. And a way to achieve that, a really good way to achieve that is to focus on on whys over hows. And what I mean by that is like, when you hear about a new framework, instead of stopping everything you do, spin up a new project and start building something with it, like Svelte or something like that, step back and say, well, what is the problem Svelte is trying to solve? Why was it created? What is the difference between it and React? And why would I pick it one over the other? That information is way more valuable because anybody's going to be able to pick up Svelte and eventually learn how to use it, right? But not everybody understands why you pick Svelte or why you would want this or why you pick a microservices architecture over a monolith and what are the benefits of those two things, right? Right. And so I think I spent a lot of time, there's something like ThoughtWorks has something called a technology radar, which is a really good like quarterly newsletter where they cover all of the technologies that are like emerging and what they were built for and the problems that they solve and stuff like that. And sometimes your lack of experience is really just like they want to hear like more you be able to speak more capably about given topics. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't know something enough. It's just that you don't know the things you need to know what you would need to learn. God, that's a lot, but that's essentially what it is. Well, and
I'll add to that by saying one of the things that stands out to me when I'm interviewing somebody early career is whether or not they give a strong impression that like I don't expect juniors to know much. Like we're hiring them in their first role. Like you're supposed to have like bare minimum. We're going to teach you everything else. So I'm not looking for them to know everything. I'm looking for them to give me that distinct impression that they know they don't know, but they're very sure they can find out. And if I get that sense that someone is really like the self-starter, they're confident in their ability to learn, they believe that any knowledge is accessible to them if they get the time and energy to work on it. Right? Those are the types of people that really stand out to me. And I think that goes back to that confidence, right? Like if you come off as not confident in your skills, you're early in your career, you don't have to be confident in your skills, but be confident in yourself, be confident in your capability to expand and grow. That I can smell that a mile away. And I'm always looking for people who do that.
Absolutely. I'm looking for that all the time as well, because honestly, when you're junior, we don't have a lot to go off. You know, there's not a lot of work history for us to examine. So we're really left with behavioral questions, right? Like, do you understand how you would do things differently given a reset on certain situations? And they don't have to be related to code, right? But it's like all we're left with is like, do they understand ways to learn quickly, right? Not necessarily understand and master something quickly, but how to get the information quickly. That's the difference. And you know, behaviorally, like, are they comfortable with critiquing themselves, retroing the things that they've done, and able to understand how they would change things to do better next time?
Absolutely.
And those are invaluable. If you present me with those two things in an interview, it's like, yeah, I absolutely want you on my team. This is somebody who's going to come in with a fresh set of eyes. They're going to look at the things that we've got going on. You know, they're going to be offering us already insightful information from the start. I can trust that as they learn and grow, they're going to be reflective of that and figure out what they can always be doing to improve. And they're going to go out and seek that information. Now, I'm going to dump it onto you, like just heap anything onto you that you want, but it's still very cool to see people have the skill and ability to do it to themselves, because you know what, there are some times when maybe, you know, you can't get to that question fast enough and they're eager to pick something up and boom, off they go with it, you know?
And that's growth, right? Like when what I love to see is when you get somebody who comes in and they start out, they're junior, they're fresh, they don't know anything, but as you dump that information on them, you never have to dump that same information twice. You start to see them answer questions in the things that you've taught them. They're quick to step up and pick up those issues. And that to me is those are the signs that really show me that somebody's going to grow well. And I love to see that. So I have another question for you that we're going to loop back a little bit, because you made a mention about, you know, people who are looking for their first careers. They don't have the luxury and the privilege of being as choosy as someone who's later in their career. And they might just have to take the job that's available, not the job they want. So so Tirth is asking, if you intern at a company that doesn't pay well, but you're getting exposure to frameworks and tools and practices, should you be looking to quit? Should you be looking to do something? Like, how do you take that situation and turn it to your advantage instead of getting stuck?
Yeah. And again, this is really tough because it depends on where you land, right? But
absolutely,
one thing that I really appreciate with different companies is when you have a little bit of time to learn. Actually, so here's something that I do. I have like a 70-30 rule. Okay. I dedicate 70% of my time at a job towards the actual job and the goal at hand, and I dedicate about 30, sometimes a little less in crunch time towards growing and learning as a developer. So even if the time isn't technically allotted to you, but kudos to all you companies out there that are giving folks the ability and time to learn. We appreciate you. But yeah, if you're not giving it, you have to kind of give it to yourself. So when you join a company and you're starting in that role, never come in there at 110%, because what happens is that becomes your baseline. And as soon as you set a baseline of 110%, that becomes expected of you. And then when it becomes crunch time, now they need 130%, but you've got nothing left to give, right? You're already at everything. So I really come in at about 70, 80% productivity, and I'm always dedicating the rest of that time to learning and to growing, and then leaves me a 20% bandwidth to push in crunch times when we really need to get things done. It's going to help you prevent burning out spectacularly, and it's going to allow you that time that you need to always be growing and doing your career. Now, you might find yourself in a situation where it's kind of too late. You've already been given 100, 110%, and you don't really feel like you're growing. And then this comes really down to like a work-life balance, time management situation where it's like you have to figure out a way to advance your skill set without, again, burning yourself out, hurting yourself. Some things that you could do are trying to switch teams. Maybe the team that you're on, you feel like you've really learned it, you're kind of stagnating there. Are there other teams in the company that you could join who are doing some of the things that you're interested in? Maybe that's like moving from a front end to a back end role, or like, trying to branch out there. Getting involved in open source, could be a good way if you have the bandwidth to start experimenting with things on a small scale. Meetups, now everything is virtual, so meetups and talks are a good way to get exposure to different topics. At ThoughtWorks Technology Radar will kind of keep you abreast of everything that's going on, and then just dabble, but just be careful. Be very, very careful of burnout. The first 2 years of my development career it really took its toll on me physically and mentally. I was burnt out, suffered deeply from depression. I was going 18 hours, a day. Oof. Super unhealthy, super unhealthy. I was just in a place, I was in a digital agency. After Gold Mobile, I went to my first digital agency role in New York City. I thought, I'd made it. I'm in the city, ma. And so, yeah. I thought I had made it, but anyway, it turned out to just be like a developer mill. They impossible deadlines. The technology stack never changed. So just after 6 months, it just felt very repetitive. I felt stagnated, and it was hard. It was hard to do that. So I just I would spend the little bit of time I had on my commute just trying to understand the hows and whys, and so it's just it's about optimizing, and again, focus on hows or whys over hows, because your next role, you'll probably learn those things. I might not expect you to know Docker, but I would expect you to understand what Docker is and why we would use Docker, right? And I won't expect you to, know the particular frameworks that we're using for an API, but I would expect you to just be able to talk about APIs in general, right, and some basic questions and problems that you might face when building an API. So it's really just knowing why someone picks a technology or would choose it is, in my opinion, way better than being very deep and specific into one thing. It also kind of funnels you into a particular silo, right? And that's all you're known for, right? You become D3 person or something like that. Maybe you want to learn something else, but that door kind of gets closed off for you. Like you were saying, if you have IT on there, all anyone wants to send you is IT jobs,
right? Yeah, when you establish expertise, that's the thing. If you become the expert on a thing, then people are going to naturally send you that work, because what we're all looking for is someone who's going to make our problems disappear. So if I have an IT problem and you show me that you're an IT expert, that's what I'm going to give you.
That's what you're going to do.
So if you don't want that work, you kind of have to keep that off the resume. You got to keep that off the radar,
Yeah, I would say if you have the ability to, my biggest takeaway would be if you have a good relationship with the person who is your manager, intern or otherwise, let them know. Let them know the problem that you're facing. Hey, I feel stagnated right now. If they are not receptive to that, then you definitely want to be somewhere else anyway, right? But now there's no guilt there. There's no nothing. You've done that, right? But if you're underpaid, let your manager know, right? If they try to help you out and work with you, awesome. If they don't, then it's time to look elsewhere. So then circle back to the beginning of setting up a resume for the job you want, figure out the whys of those technologies, and now you're armed to go into interviews and talk about them.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to ask you one last one, because I think this is going to be a good point to end on. So Blalia asks, how do you learn to code and program if you don't know enough about computers? It looks like you didn't grow up with computers, and I know that you also didn't grow up with computers.
I spotted that question in the chat, and I was going to ask you if we could get to that in the end. Yeah, so I never had a computer in my home growing up. And I would say, like, I'm not normally one to say, like, learn the fundamentals, before you go. But having a basic understanding of how computers work, being able to, like, use, like, a keyboard, like I forget what they call it, like the proper, typing. Like I used to 2 fingers like this. And like if you're in a situation where that's all you can do, then yes, of course, that's all you can do. But if you're capable, absolutely, like learn how to type so that you don't have to be looking at the keyboard every 2 seconds. Like once you understand the basics of computers and you've internalized that, it opens up the ability to focus on programming, right? Because right now you're trying to learn 2 things at once,
right?
And that's always going to be a problem. So let's break it down into smaller pieces. Let's attack the things. Let's put them in order and let's attack them one by one. Get comfortable on a keyboard, then get comfortable with how computers and the internet works. And you don't have to go deep. Again, just why? How does this work? Like the basics of the internet. How does that work? And start from there, and then get your way into programming. It doesn't mean you can't be reading blog posts about programming and doing stuff like that and messing around, but invest the time up front to really get comfortable with computers because you're trying to make it your full-time job.
Right.
And again, you don't have to know how to drive a car to be a mechanic at all. You really don't. Like you could be an amazing mechanic and not know how to drive a car. But you can't be a mechanic and not know how to use your tools, right? And I think that is a difference, right? Like in this case, a keyboard is a tool, and you got to be proficient with it if you want to be a good developer.
One way that I've heard this described that I really like is, when you are writing code, you're not just thinking about, you're thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve. You're thinking about the code that you're writing. You're thinking about what you're typing into the keyboard, like you said. So when you see somebody who is really proficient at this, they've moved to what is called unconscious competence, right? Where they're no longer thinking about that. And we're all unconsciously competent at something. Maybe we can, sing a song without thinking about the melody. Maybe we are, we can like juggle a soccer ball. Maybe we can, anything, like any sports that you can play without really thinking about where your body is moving. Anything, like if you can type without having to think about your fingers and you can just say, you're typing like you speak. Each one of those things removes a cognitive load from the work that you're doing, and it lets you just play. And that's where excellence can really be born. If you have to think about every step in the way, you're going to have so many blockers. It doesn't mean you can't, but it's going to slow you down.
It's going to slow you down greatly. It's going to frustrate you. It's going to force you to split the cognitive load you have in your head amongst multiple things. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it's the thing I love about types. Types allow me to take so much state and throw it out of my head and rely on something else to provide that information for me so I can focus only on the problem at hand, not remembering if this is a freaking string or a number or whatever, right? Like I don't have to worry about that. I can just move forward, focus solely on the goal. Yeah. So as many things as you can turn into, what did you call that?
Unconscious competence.
I love that. Unconscious competence. All the things, folks. Yeah.
And this is it's a theory that you can read on. If I can't remember who came up with it, but it's like an educational theory. When you first start learning something, you go from unconscious incompetence, which is where you don't know that you don't know something. Then you go to conscious incompetence, which is when you realize that there's a thing you don't know. And for somebody who's just starting programming, that's probably where you feel. You know that you could program, but you're not sure how to make it happen. Then you study, you train, you get to conscious competence, where if you think about it, if you focus, you can do the job. And then where mastery comes in is unconscious competence, where you're able to do the thing without thinking. This is where somebody who can play a piano by ear, or somebody who, you like anything that you can just do. If you can walk and chew gum and you don't have to think about either of those things, you are unconsciously competent at walking and chewing gum, right?
Absolutely. I love it.
Well, Kurt, so we're at the end of our time. So thank you again so much for sharing your story. I know that your time is super valuable, and I know that like what a hell of a ride you've been on. So thank you again for taking the time to share with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Time might be valuable, but I can't think of anything more valuable than giving this information to the community. I'm available on Twitter at Kurt Kemple, just my whole name together. If you have more questions, follow up, hit me up. I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. I hope you all do amazing things. I can't wait to see what you do. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, thanks again to freeCodeCamp for hosting this. If you want to see more live programming, I run a show twice a week called Learn with Jason. We've got an episode coming up on Tuesday. You can find that at learnwithjason.dev. You can find me on Twitter at Lengstorf, J and my last name, Lengstorf. Kurt, thank you again. Chat, thank you for hanging out. Quincy, thanks for hanging out in the chat and moderating. We will see you next Friday with another wonderful guest. We'll see you.
Later, everyone.